Greetings everyone, here we are, the Q&A session for February 2025. We have a couple of good questions today. I just read through them. I'm very excited to talk about these. So let us get started. First, Donald asks, what are your thoughts on cleanses and detoxes? Great question, appropriate time of year to be thinking about this. What would you recommend for frequency, seasonally, annually, etc., and during said cleanse or detox? Should you stop taking any herbs you are taking, including adaptogens, for the duration? Fantastic question. So, first of all, my thoughts on cleanses and detoxes. We have ancestral evidence that this is something people have been doing for a long time, especially in the spring, right? We have herbs specifically like wormwood, where there are remedies that folks, after having eaten mostly preserved foods and salted meats over the winter, may have picked up some parasites or worms. And so it was not uncommon that part of the springtime transition is that we would have gone into a little bit of a detox, a little bit of a cleanse to kind of get rid of that. I think too that bringing these vermifuge, sort of bitter herbs in the spring to get the liver going, to clear out the ducts, to kind of start helping the body process fats differently. I think this is very smart. I don't really like the hardcore cleanses, the fasting for 7 days, drinking only apple cider vinegar and lemon juice. That's not my style. I think it's too pushy, and I think that it tends to stir things up that the body's trying to deal with and process in its own time. And oftentimes people don't look very good when they're doing a cleanse, and they don't feel very good after. So that's my opinion. I think gentle is better. So think about bringing in detoxifying teas, for a week or two during the seasonal shifts. Changing your hydration, maybe finding a place where you can go to a sauna and doing some intentional sweats a few times. That's more my speed. What would I recommend for frequency? I think seasonally. I think there's a way that we can do a cleanse for each seasonal shift that makes sense. Bitters to stimulate the mind and to get everything going in the spring. Maybe we're doing more of a warming, blood building cleanse as we enter into the cold months. It could be intuitive. It could also be based on herbs and foods that are accessible to you at that time of year. It could also be based on just how you feel. Some people are fine all year long, and they really struggle when we start moving into the heat of summer. So those are people who maybe we would do a little bit of yin tonifying, like nourishing the vital fluids of the body, nourishing the blood, sort of slowing things down so the heat isn't so overwhelming. Is that a cleanse? No, maybe more of a prehab, right? But then at the end of summer, we could do something to sort of cleanse or detox the excessive heat from somebody. So that's my thoughts there. Should you stop taking any herbs? Good question. You can 3 to 5 days of just focusing on herbs to clear out the system, kind of just give yourself a break. I like to do that anyway, though. So, I'm one of those people that even with my adaptogens, when my bottle of ashwagandha runs out or my reishi powder runs out, I allow myself a day, 2 days, 3 days before I worry about picking that back up, just to have a little moment. It's probably once every 2 months. Just say, how do I feel without that herb? How are things going? How am I feeling? So I do that anyway. And I think if you're going to do an intentional cleanse and you can take a break from the herbs, they're not herbs that you really need in your system every day, sure. And even adaptogens, yeah, no problem. So fantastic question, thank you. Lanny, any tips on drying herbs in perpetually moist environments? I have no personal experience with this. Living in the high desert where I do, we have very, very low humidity all year round. So here's what I think. Folks that I know who live in more humid places have to create drying situations. So either they're using humid or food dehydrators, right? And you can get super expensive ones that will, or inexpensive, sorry, that will only go up to like 95 degrees, and that's perfect. The real benefit of a dehydrator is that it's kind of spinning the air. It's keeping the air moving so that moisture as it comes out of the tissues of the plants goes away rather than sort of settles and invites mold and mildew and all of that. So you could invest in a food dehydrator and you really don't need a fancy one. Unless you're processing huge amounts of herbs for some reason, get a cheap one and you just have to plan how you're harvesting herbs and bringing them in rounds, that your dehydrator can handle. Another thing you can do is build a drying space in your house. A lot of people use attics because they will sort of collect heat even towards the autumn when we're doing a lot of harvesting. My big thing is airflow. So sometimes all you really have to do is put in a fan, a little box fan, to just keep the air circulating, make sure that when you hang plants to dry them, you're not bundling them so tightly that there's all kinds of spaces where airflow can happen. You're better off doing them sparsely, which is more annoying because it's more work, and making sure the air can get around them than bundling them tightly and having that problem. Hang them from rafters. Lay them on newsprint, maybe change the newsprint every 2 or 3 days if it looks like it's starting to collect, moisture. But I think airflow is it. And for most people, a rack of some sort or hanging of some sort and a regular old box fan is enough. And if you really, like our friends, some of our friends in Cymru in Wales, you may have to invest in a dehumidifier for one room of your house. Like again, an attic or a little part in the basement or a mudroom or something, and sort of pull some of the humidity out of the air. But I've never heard of anybody in the States having to do that. So airflow is where it's at. Heather asks, how do you combat electoral dysfunction? I like this. I have a hard time starting anything like oils and tinctures because I worry about the start and end dates and where they are in the moon cycle. And I personally like to hit days of the week that correspond with the intention of the item. What is your process for determining best time to start or end crafted items? Okay. First of all, I just had a conversation with somebody about this the other day. If it comes down to will I make the remedy or won't I based on the complexities of timing, throw the timing out the window. The plants are sovereign spirits. They are who they are. When we can line it up to the planetary hour or a day related to a deity, or my style where we try to make medicine with the lunar tides, that's gravy, right? That's icing on the cake. You will still make fantastic medicine if you do it when you have the ability to do it. If your tincture, you start it and your plan is to let it macerate for 2 weeks and it ends up being 4 weeks, you get busy, you get scattered, life happens, okay, that's okay. Better that you have made the tincture 90% perfect than made the tincture 0% not at all. Right? So, process better than shooting for perfection. When we get it into our bones, then it's easier to start saying, okay, well, now I'm going to start planning ahead and knowing that I like to start my tinctures on the new moon and I'm going to have everything ready. You could for 3 weeks before a new moon start getting all of your jars filled with dried herbs, getting them labeled, getting everything set up. And on the new moon, you pour your vodka, right? You start the maceration. That's when it begins. So there's also little things, and actually I have to do that here in the clinic because I make so much medicine and we burn through it so quickly that it would not be possible for me every new moon to do all of the medicine crafting that I have to do for the month. I'm seeing that a tincture behind me gets low and I will preemptively get the jar, put the dried herbs in, label it, and put the lid on, and I have a spot in our kitchen where that starts to compile. And then on the day before, day of, day after the new moon, all I have to do is go in and start the tinctures, pour the alcohol in, get them shaken up, and then I move them to a different place to macerate. And then as the full moon comes around, I try to press as close to the full moon, but sometimes I have 20, 25 tinctures that are ready. I can't do that in a day. It's not possible. So sometimes I'm starting 2 days before and doing 3 or 4 a day. You know, some of them are really finicky and they have to be, you know, I triple filter my tinctures. It takes them 2 or 3 days to filter. So, sidebar, hopefully there's something helpful in there. Let's see, what is your process for determining best time to start or end crafted items? So you can go by the lunar tides. I like to do that because I just put it in my bullet journal and I don't have to think about it. And I'm so habituated to it at this point that it just makes sense. And I just know that it's coming, right? Like with our plant spirit journeys, I know we start the day after the dark moon. We start on the day of the new moon. And so every month my mind is kind of already like bookmarking that time that I have things I have to have done before then for you all, right? You could craft a medicine making calendar that's specific to this by the moon, lunar tides, by the type of medicine, the days and hours that you want to start the tincture or officially end it, like however ritually you do that. That could be something. You could do one thing at a time, one medicine at a time. I know it's not as exciting because you will only end up with one remedy per month or 2 or whatever. But sometimes, you know, just simplifying it and putting all your energy into one thing is easier. And then again, as it becomes like second nature, you can start adding more without it feeling overwhelmed, with it just feeling like this is just how I do things, right? So, don't worry too much about the start and end dates if it's getting in the way of you actually making the medicine. Most important is making the medicine, and then we can start refining into these cool practices like following the moon and following hours and days and all of that. That's really the most important thing, is just do it. Do it, make it happen. Thank you, good question. I'm sure a lot of people have had that question. I myself have had that question, so I'm glad you brought it up. Katie, last one we're going to do. In your opinion, what are the spiritual ethics of cultivating plants, herbs specifically indoor year-round? I like this question. This is cool. So cultivating plants means that we are intentionally growing them, right? We are preparing the soil and the pot, and Katie's kind of mentioning specifically indoors, right? We're planting the seed, we're babying it, we're getting it to grow. Here's my angle on this, which I don't hear a lot of people talk about, and that's interesting to me because for me, this is what is happening. This is the ritual of planting a seed, whether it's out in your garden or in a pot in the house or in your little starter kits in February or in a hoop house or like whatever your thing is. When we, as people who practice the plant spirit path, as people who practice spiritual herbalism, as people who are animists and we want to engage person to person with the plant spirits, the act of planting a seed is a ritual of invocation. The act of planting a seed is a ritual of invocation. When we plant a seed, we are asking, Mullen, please come to this space. Please come and inhabit this space. Please fill this space with your physical presence. It's not any different than when we have a statue of a god or goddess, or we light a candle to represent the presence of a spirit, right? That we're invoking them to inhabit and be present in a space. When we plant a seed, we are invoking a plant to come into that space by our invitation. Which is different than when they show up wherever they want in the wild. That's a different thing entirely. That's them being sovereign beings, doing what they want, when they want, how they want. And there's a certain kind of magic to that. But there's also a certain kind of power when we plant a seed, which is a ritual of invocation. We invite the plant to show up. They do. The plant sprouts and grows successfully, but there's a flip side to this. We would never invite a guest to our home and have the room cold and the table empty. So when we do this invocation, in my opinion, we should be ready to receive our guest when they show up with all of the respect and being a good host, right? Remember other class, we talk about this so much in other class, the etymology of the word guest and host both come from the reconstructed Proto-Indo-European word gosti, which is essentially the most noble and virtuous principle that holds community together, is being an excellent host and being a gracious guest and keeping that guest-host relationship of reciprocity going. So when you invite the plants into your home, into your garden, into your life, there's also this part too where we then have to be good hosts to them, and we have to water them, and we have to talk to them, and we have to learn about them. And when the time comes, we have to harvest them well. We have to not ignore them. We have to harvest them with the right intent, and we have to make medicine with them, or whatever we're doing, or maybe we're letting them go to seed, or maybe the animals have taken them, whatever it is. The flip side to the invitation is the hospitality. So we have to also do that. So hopefully that's helpful. Katie also mentioned specifically year round, right? So if you have a plant that because they're indoors, they can grow year round, that's fantastic, right? You have a plant who can be with you through thick and thin, through all the seasons, can be with you as you do life every single day. And houseplants have a funny way of becoming close friends, right? Because they're like in the house with us. They're in our kitchens watching us cook. They're in our living rooms watching us relax. They become part of our everyday. And I think even though these plants are sometimes difficult to connect with because we can't usually ingest them, most houseplants are not ingestible to humans or animals. And maybe we're not harvesting them for medicine for that way. They do show us how we can just share space with a plant in acknowledgement and be in their presence and have their influence in our spaces through not having to touch or ingest or wear, but just being around, right? Houseplants are one of the greatest teachers of how plants influence energy field, how plants influence space. So that's very cool. We post a question call on the 20th of every month on Patreon for all tiers. You get to put your questions in, and then you see the answers right here in our monthly Q&A video. Hopefully some inspiration and some cool things. Thank you guys so much for all the questions this month. They're always fantastic. I'll see you next time.